A native of Vancouver, Washington, who played in the WCC 2 years ago, is back in the transfer portal and has heard from Gonzaga. Could he be the team's Nolan Hickman replacement?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Well, folks, the Zags contacted Tanner Toolson from Utah Valley University. We're going to talk about him. We're going to break down his game, his fit in Spokane. We're also going to give an update on some other Gonzaga targets. We're going to talk Rodney Rice. We're going to talk Wesley Yates, Dan Skillings, a few other guys the Zags have targeted, a few other guys who've made commitments in the portal as well. And then we're going to close out the show talking about Nolan Hickman getting an invite to the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, what that means for him and his potential professional future. And we'll close out the show talking about Mark Few's latest honor, which happened on Friday. But we're going to start with another transfer portal target for Mark Few and the Zags. And there's plenty. There's like 5 or 6 guys on my list that we haven't even talked about yet. Gonzaga is casting a wide net right now, reaching out to multiple players in the transfer portal. And they're almost all 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". They're all 2s or 3s. Most of them are good three-point shooters. It's very clear what Gonzaga is pursuing currently in the transfer portal. And of course, with the losses of Nolan Hickman and Caleb Battle and Dusty Stromer in the transfer portal, it's not surprising to see them pursue somebody who plays the 2 or plays the wing. We kind of expect Braden Smith to step into the point guard position. Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Nascente are in the mix as defensive-focused wings. So a score-first, three-point shooting type 2 guard is definitely an area that Gonzaga could utilize and upgrade. And that is a lot of who Tanner Toolson is. Tanner Toolson, 6'5" redshirt junior guard, so he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. He's been contacted by the Zags. He's 6'5". He's initially from Vancouver, Washington. Zags have had success in the Vancouver, Washington area. They recruited Dan Dickau. I guess they didn't recruit him out of high school, but obviously Dan Dickau from the area, Richie Fromm from the area, from a little bit farther north in Battleground, Washington. So certainly have seen some success from the southwest corner of the state of Washington in the past. He played at Union High School in Vancouver, was a zero-star recruit, not recruited, or zero-star prospect, not recruited by very many schools out of high school, ended up going to BYU. Mark Pope recruited him when he was the head coach at BYU. This was in the 22-23 season, so this is when the BYU was still in the WCC. However, Tanner Toolson only played 6 games for BYU as a true freshman in that 22-23 season. He averaged 3.5 points in 8.5 minutes in those 6 games, opted to hit the transfer portal after that, and did in fact get a redshirt year, so that year does not count against him eligibility-wise. He transferred to Utah Valley, so didn't go too far, stayed in the area, but joins the Western Athletic Conference at Utah Valley, the Wolverines. Spent 2 years there. His first season there, he was a starter right away, 32 games, started 31 of them for the Wolverines, played about 28 minutes per game, averaged 9.5 points, about 4 boards, 1.6 assists, a little over a steal. He did take over 5 threes per game in that first year at Utah Valley. However, he only shot 29.5% from 3, so wasn't a particularly efficient three-point scorer. He wasn't really an efficient scorer at all in his first full season at Utah Valley. Was didn't shoot very well on 2-pointers, didn't even shoot very well from the free throw line. But then, as a junior, or I guess a redshirt sophomore, his second year at Utah Valley this past season, Toolson was a lot better. He started all 34 games that he played for the Wolverines, played about 29 minutes per game, so only 1 extra minute per game from his average the year before, but he ballooned up from 9.5 points to 13.5 points per game, still averaged 4 boards, 1.5 assists, and a little over 1 steal per game. That was all pretty consistent, but the efficiency went up dramatically. Toolson's effective field goal percentage as a redshirt freshman for Utah Valley was 44.6%. Last year, it was 55%. That is a dramatic increase in how effective of a scorer Toolson was at Utah Valley. He shot 58% on 2-pointers. That's extremely good. That'd be pretty good for a big man. That's very good for a guard. Shows that he's got the ability to score around the rim, to finish through contact. It shows he's got a mid-range, all sorts of different varieties of ways he can score the basketball. He also shot 35% from three. So again, he didn't become like a 40% three-point shooter or anything like that, but the difference between under 30% on 5 attempts per game versus 35% on 5.5 attempts per game is pretty dramatic. That's a lot more made threes per season. And again, those of you who are everyday listeners, you probably know what I'm about to say. I am focused more on players who have a high volume of 3-point attempts versus their actual percentage. Obviously, you don't want players who are actively very bad at 3-point shooting, but if a player took a lot of threes, I still like that to come into Gonzaga's offense, where there's going to be more floor spacing and there tends to be more open looks from three, especially for a player who was kind of the man, the way that Toolson was at Utah Valley. I would think coming to a system that spaces the floor a little bit better and that has really dominant low post presences like the Zags do with EK and Huff, I think that would be a promising sign for Toolson's ability to shoot it much better were he in Spokane. He also shot a little over 79% from the free throw line as well. He was all WAC first team. He was all WAC tournament as well, in part because he had a monster game against Grand Canyon, a heartbreaking loss for Utah Valley. Had they won this game, they would have been making the NCAA tournament for the first time in program history. They instead fall to the Lopes. Not because of Toolson by any stretch. He had 28 points, shot 6 of 9 from beyond the arc in this game. He went crazy trying to lead the Wolverines into the NCAA tournament. They just came up short. He ultimately hit the portal after the season and has kind of got 5 schools on his list right now. 2 of them he already visited. One of them he has a visit scheduled for, and the other 2 are Gonzaga and Xavier. Xavier, of course, Richard Pitino, the son of Rick Pitino, the head coach at New Mexico, has now taken the job at Xavier, trying to get Toolson to head out there with him. Gonzaga is also contacted, and then we've seen Toolson already visited BYU. So he's potentially looking at returning to BYU, where he only played 6 games as a freshman. Obviously, it's a brand new coaching staff with Kevin Young taking over after Mark Pope went to Kentucky. But this team is already absolutely loaded in the backcourt. Like, there's no reasonable expectation that Toolson could commit to BYU and have a chance of starting. They got Rob Wright from Baylor out of the transfer portal. They spent $3.5 million on him. They're starting him, that's for sure. AJ Dibansa, the number 1 recruit in the entire country, is going to BYU. Now he's a 3. He's a 6'9" small forward, so he'll play the 3. Rob Wright will play the 1. But if Richie Saunders comes back, he's playing the 2. So Tanner Toolson's very likely coming off the bench if he were to go to BYU. Now, Toolson also took a visit to Iowa on Sunday. Iowa now coached by Ben McCollum, who was at Drake last year after Fran McCaffrey was fired. So Iowa looking to rebuild under Coach McCollum, who had a ton of success with the Drake Bulldogs this past year. They already kind of have a starting 2-guard in Bennett Sturts as well. So I'm curious Toolson's role there, what that might look like. He also has a visit scheduled to Utah State this week. So maybe looking to try to make a 3rd straight school in the state of Utah his home. Utah State, of course, in the Mountain West would be a very solid fit for him as well. And then, like I said, Gonzaga and Xavier. So while the Zags haven't set up a meeting or haven't set up a visit or anything like that, it's notable that they're in the mix here. It's notable that they are the most successful program on this list in terms of recent success in college basketball. And they have a more available starting spot. Like, he would probably be penciled in as the starting shooting guard for Gonzaga were he to commit there. Whereas I don't think that happens at BYU. I'm not sure that happens at Iowa. It probably happens at Utah State, maybe Xavier, but I feel like Gonzaga's in a position where they kind of can offer a lot more to Toolson than maybe some of these other schools can. And in terms of what he'd bring to Gonzaga, he's a Nolan Hickman replacement. He's not as good of a 3-point shooter. In terms of his percentage, his volume's about the same, but his percentage is not as good as Hickman's was. He's bigger. He's about 6'5". Hickman was about 6'3". Statistically, he's a better defender. I think advanced analytics stats, comparing them team to team is a little bit silly. I don't necessarily know convincingly that Toolson would be a better defender in Gonzaga's system than Hickman was, but he's 2 inches taller. And he's got weight on him, so I think that alone would probably help him be more effective on that end of the floor. Statistically, he's also a better rebounder. So I think that if you expect that the 3-point shooting ticks up in Gonzaga's offense, again, the Ryan Woolridge effect, as I've dubbed it, I think you're looking at a possible kind of better version of Nolan Hickman for at least 1 year, potentially 2 years, if Toolson were to come to Gonzaga. Right now, I think he'd be penciled in as the starting shooting guard. Like I said, you have Braden Smith at the 1, Toolson at the 2, and then you have Warley at the 3 with Innocente coming off the bench. Obviously, this depends on the health of Steele Venters as well. But I could also see Gonzaga trying to recruit another guard and potentially then having Toolson come off the bench. I don't think that he's like, there are certain players, like if they were to land Rodney Rice or if they were to land Wesley Yates, which we'll talk about those guys in a second, where those guys would be like automatically penciled in as a starting position. There's no debate. They're starting. We're not even looking for other starting caliber players. Whereas with Toolson, I feel like if they did land him, they might still look for players that could compete with him for that starting spot. But we'll see. Obviously, with 3 visits already either in the books or lined up this week, and Gonzaga not among them, it's hard to feel super confident about the team's ability to land him. But certainly if they make a push for him, I could see this being something that happens, and him returning to the state of Washington for either one of his final 2 years of eligibility or his final 2 seasons if he opted to stay for 2 more years in Spokane. Well, like I said, there's other transfer targets that we're going to talk about in future episodes. But for now, instead of doing that, we're going to kind of look back at some of the players we've already talked about, the Rodney Rices, the Wesley Yates, the Daniel Skillings, the Isaiah Pashas of the world, all these guys that have been talked about in the last week on Locked On Zags. Where are we at? What are the updates on those guys? We're going to get to that here in just a second. But first, folks, you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to our finances. And thankfully, with Monarch Money, managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're moving away from talking about specific transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs to instead talk about some of the targets we've already discussed, players that have come up in the last week or so here on Locked On Zags. What's the update? Are there any news stories? Are there guys who've already committed somewhere else? Are there guys who have created top 5, top 6 lists, who've set visits? So we're going to kind of go through some of the players we've already talked about and what the latest, as I'm recording this on Sunday evening, is for some of these guys. We'll start with Rodney Rice, Maryland transfer, probably Gonzaga's top target in the portal. 37% three-point shooter last year for the Terps, started for one of the best teams in the Big Ten, one of the best teams in college basketball. He has listed his final 6, and Gonzaga is among those top 6, as well as a return to Maryland, Villanova, Tennessee, Auburn, and USC. Over the weekend, Rodney Rice visited both Tennessee and Villanova. After his Villanova visit, which it should be noted, Coach Kevin Willard, who was his coach at Maryland, left to take the head coaching job at Villanova. So it always felt like Villanova had a pretty good chance of bringing Rodney Rice along with them. And the latest reports, as I'm recording this again on Sunday evening, are a lot of crystal balls very suddenly flipping to Villanova. Tennessee was thought to have the upper hand. A return to Maryland was not out of the question whatsoever after Buzz Williams, the longtime head coach at Texas A&M, took the job at Maryland. A lot of folks thought, hey, Rodney Rice is going to stay at Maryland, but now big consensus is Villanova. To the point where, like, I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if by the time you're listening to this, Rodney Rice is a Villanova Wildcat. Like, I think that's very likely going to happen. While he does not have he also indicated after the Villanova trip that he's not planning to take any more visits. Now, for Gonzaga, they did have a Zoom call with him, so it's not like there was no contact whatsoever. If there was no contact outside of Gonzaga reached out and that was it, then I think we would feel like chances are 0%. Because there was at least a Zoom call, chances are like 1% or like maybe 3% or 5%. But ultimately, he went to Tennessee, he went to Villanova. Everybody said, oh, it looks like he's going to Villanova. I expect that's going to be the case. Tough for Gonzaga. Not a huge surprise necessarily that Kevin Willard would try to get some of his best guys to follow him from Maryland to Villanova. So that's what I expect to be the case here. I'd be pretty surprised if Rodney Rice ends up in Spokane with Gonzaga, but making the top 6 is not a bad thing. It certainly helps other recruits kind of see high profile players. Considering the Zags, I think is always a good thing. But that's my general guess here on where we're at with Rodney Rice. Dan Skillings, Cincinnati transfer we talked about earlier this week, 6'6" wing, who's not a great three-point shooter, like under 30%, although he likes to shoot a lot of three-pointers. He has set up 2 visits. His 2 visits that he set up are both happening this week. Baylor and LSU are the 2 visits there. He'd been contacted by a huge list of schools that included those 2. It also included Gonzaga. It also included Florida, Kentucky, USC, Creighton, etc. Huge list of schools there. Just because he's only set up 2 visits to Baylor and LSU doesn't necessarily mean that those are the only 2 schools that he is considering. It certainly means that they are the front runners to land Daniel Skillings right now. No idea where Gonzaga is at, although I will say that I am not as big of a proponent of Dan Skillings as maybe others might be, because I don't think that the skill set that he has is necessarily what Gonzaga needs. They need more floor spacing. He's like a more ball dominant, let me go to the rim and create type player. He's a little bit like Michael Ajayi. He's kind of a mix of Michael Ajayi and Caleb Battle. I don't think either of them really reached their potential in Spokane, so I'm not super confident Dan Skillings would. So I'm kind of content with him looking elsewhere if that's the case. But of course, if Gonzaga could still be in the mix here, and I think we could talk ourselves into it if he did end up wanting to come to Spokane. But he certainly wasn't my favorite fit among the players that we've been talking about out of the transfer portal. Isaiah Pasha from Delaware, in case you missed this story, he had Gonzaga in his top 3. It was Gonzaga, Texas Tech, and Penn State. He's planning to take a visit to Spokane, canceled his visit, and said him and Gonzaga are no longer communicating with each other. The report was that Gonzaga basically was looking at some international players, which we'll talk about later this week as well, and kind of was hemming and hawing on whether they still wanted to bring Pasha out for his visit. So he said, okay, I'm good, and didn't come out on his visit. I don't really blame him. I would rather go somewhere where I'm 100% wanted. It's also worth pointing out, and we'll talk about this in a second, that Texas Tech, who was looking for players kind of in the similar ilk to Gonzaga, they needed guards. They needed 3-point shooting guards in particular. They went out and landed a pair of players that I think, or 3 players, I think, in the last couple of days in the transfer portal that all would probably play over Isaiah Pasha, or at least play cut into his playing time. So it's not official yet, but I would not be surprised whatsoever to find out very soon that Isaiah Pasha is committing to Penn State. I think that is the likely outcome for Pasha. Would have been a great fit in Spokane, but it sounds like the Zags were looking in other directions there. So I can't blame the kid for looking out for himself, and hopefully things work out well for him if he does end up going to Penn State. Mentioned Wesley Yates earlier. Wesley Yates, who was recruited by Gonzaga out of high school, went to Washington for a year, but hurt his foot and sat out the entire season at UW, transferred after the season because of the coaching change, went to USC, and then had a dominant season at USC in the year 2025. In the final 20 games for the Trojans, Yates averaged 18 points and shot 50% from 3. Well, he committed to Washington. He's going back to Seattle to play for the Huskies. A little bit of a surprising move. I was kind of under the impression the main reason he went to UW in the first place was because his cousin was on the coaching staff, and then they made that move. They fired Mike Hopkins. That whole coaching staff left, and then he hit the portal and goes to USC, has a dominant season, was being pursued heavily by Kentucky and lots of other really good programs with big old bags of money, and he goes back to UW. UW's got a lot of money. Maybe they found a way to write him a big old check. Maybe he's still got friends, family connections there. He wants to go back. Who knows? I thought it was kind of an odd fit, but he's going to probably be the best player for that UW team, and certainly is capable of putting up huge numbers in the Big Ten. I just was not expecting him to go back to UW, but hey, it happens. A couple other players to talk about here. We've mentioned Texas Tech. I said we're going to mention them again. They landed 2 players from the WCC, LaJuan Watts from Washington State and Tyree Bryan from Santa Clara. Texas Tech said, we need 3-point shooting, so they went out and got Tyree Bryan, who is a phenomenal 3-point shooter. Gonzaga fans will remember him for hanging 35 on them in Spokane for Santa Clara. So now he's at Texas Tech, replacing Chance McMillan. LaJuan Watts also goes to Texas Tech after a prolific season for Washington State in the WCC. And then Isaiah Watts, the other Watts that was on Washington State's roster this past year, he ends up going to Maryland. We're seeing a lot of players from the WCC committing to high-profile programs like Maryland, like Texas Tech. We saw Mikey retire to Baylor. We've seen a handful of others as well. So wanted to give those guys a shout here. I'm sure we'll talk more WCC and kind of what's going on with some of those players in the portal here in the coming weeks. But while we're talking about players, there's some flutterings of like, oh, could LaJuan Watts come to Spokane? Could Isaiah Watts go to Gonzaga? Like they're now somewhere else, so we don't have to worry about them. We'll talk about Cedric Coward, who was Wazoo's best player in the 6 games that he played last year before going down with an injury. We'll talk about him later this week as well, because he's got some connections outside of just being having played in the eastern part of the state of Washington. There's some other connections between him and Gonzaga that are worth exploring on a different episode. We're going to close out the show talking about Nolan Hickman. He accepted an invite to a prominent pre-NBA draft event. What could that mean for his professional career? That and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get the supplies that you need from the site made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, SupplyHouse is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product information to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, SupplyHouse offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, so now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show, talking Nolan Hickman and Monarch Few and their latest on both of those two gentlemen as we get out of the show here and get you on with your Monday. We'll start with Nolan Hickman. He's attending the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, which is a pre-NBA draft kind of post-season event. It's been going on forever. I didn't realize this. It's been around since 1953 was the initial Pitt Portsmouth Invitational Tournament. That's what they call it. This year, it's scheduled for April 16th through April 19th, so it's going to go on towards the end of this week. The event is 64 players. It is invite only, so you have to be invited to this event. 64 players. They're all seniors or graduated seniors. Historically, there have been players who are out of eligibility. We've seen players participate in the Pit and then actually go play more college basketball because of the COVID year and because of various other things recently. That didn't used to be the case. Typically, it's players who are out of eligibility, who are graduating seniors. Again, 64 of them, 8 teams of 8. They play 12 games over 3 days in front of scouts, in front of people to potentially try to make the league. And in this case, if you do well at Portsmouth, you might get an invite to the G League Combine. If you do well at the G League Combine, the top players from the G League Combine every year get invited to the actual NBA Draft Combine, and that's where you want to be. That's where everybody's at. That's where you get to test your skills against the best of the best. So Portsmouth is not typically full of players who are going to eventually be NBA players. Sometimes guys from the Portsmouth Invitational make the league, but it's rarely drafted guys, at least not recently. And that tracks with Nolan Hickman. Rasir Bolton was in this event a couple of years ago, a guy who realistically wasn't going to get drafted, but made sense to be invited and made sense to participate in said event. John Stockton did it way back when, though. So again, but in previous eras, it was an event for the best of the best. Scottie Pippen participated. There's been other like NBA Hall of Fame type players who participated, but recently it's more for guys who were good, really good college players, but who aren't likely going to sniff the NBA. And I think that's probably the case here. Looking at the rest of this list of players that we've seen so far, we haven't seen all 64 players, but like Tyson Degenhart from Boise State was on this list. Nelly Jr. Joseph from New Mexico, David Joplin from Marquette, Sean Padula from Ole Miss, Caden Shedrick from Texas, like really good players, players that I think will have successful professional basketball careers, but very few who look realistically like they're going to be NBA players. But that said, I'm excited for Nolan. I'm excited for him to go out there and get a chance to compete and play well and perhaps parlay that into, if not an invitation to the G League Combine, at the very least, like attention from some scouts, maybe some international scouts, maybe some guys who want to put him on their G League roster and let him cook there. Like there's a lot of different opportunities that could come out of this. I would be surprised if it leads to a G League combine or even certainly an NBA draft combine invite for Hickman, just because I think he's a pretty known commodity and his strengths and his weaknesses are pretty well established at this point, as it is with most seniors. But I still think it's obviously a cool opportunity for him to get a chance to strut his stuff against other players who are considered kind of comparable to him, in terms of being the same age and having had similarly successful college basketball careers. Last but not least, Mark Few on Friday in Los Angeles was honored with the John R. Wooden Legends of Coaching Award. It was known back in October that he was going to be this year's recipient of the Legends of Coaching Award, but the actual ceremony happened on Friday. It was very cool to see him get honored for this. It's an award that's been around since 1999, given out to, an honorary coach in college basketball every single year, usually kind of a Hall of Fame type coach, somebody who's had a very successful career. They get to go to this event in LA. They get to be honored. There's videos. Steve Kerr posted a really great video talking about Mark Few and kind of telling him how happy he was and proud of him and how much fun he had coaching with him at the Olympics. And then he gets interviewed. Mark Few gets interviewed, and he had some good quotes to say. I'll just read one of them here. He said, quote, "What I've been blessed to have is I've had great players over the years that have been coachable and just an amazing staff, and then just a wonderful, incredible administration at Gonzaga. We've all been in line, and we all just pull the rope in the same direction." I think that's probably very, very rare in college athletics. And I will say, I think that Mark Few acknowledging that about Gonzaga, I think is he's always been very complimentary of Gonzaga, but he hasn't really had to fight with administration very much. And I do feel like, as somebody who now covers the sport more nationally, you hear stories every year of like Buzz Williams left Texas A&M for Maryland. He didn't talk to his athletic director for an entire year before he left. It's like, what in the heck? Like, that seems insane to me. And obviously there's a difference between schools that have football and where men's basketball is not the priority. And Gonzaga has always been very adamant that their men's and women's basketball programs are kind of, 1 and 2, and they are the priority for the program and the school. But it is something that is rare for college athletics to have. They had so much continuity with Mike Roth, who was there for a long time, and Chris Standiford, who's been there for a long time before even taking over as AD. And I think it's cool that Mark Few can kind of acknowledge, hey, this has been a huge part of our success. It's not just me. It's not just the players. It's the administration and the people who've been, as he put it, pulling the rope in the same direction. Like, we're not fighting each other. We're all on the same page. We're all trying to do this together. And I think that is a really common sentiment around programs that are highly successful, and one we've seen a lot with Gonzaga. Some other people who have won the John R. Wooden Legends of Coaching Award: John Calipari, Don Staley, Jay Wright, Bill Self, Gino Auriemma, Tom Izzo, Jim Boeheim, Roy Williams, Coach K, Dean Smith. I mean, that's a pretty darn good list of coaches in this sport. So it's very, very cool to see Mark Few's name on this list. Obviously, the same year where he's up for induction to the college Naismith College Basketball Hall of Fame. Just starting to really see the fruits of his labor be recognized. Obviously, we know the one thing still missing is that darn national championship, but a tremendous, prolific career for Mark Few. And I'm glad to see it being honored the way that it has been in this last calendar year with the Olympics, with the Hall of Fame, now with the Legends of Coaching Award. Just cool stuff to see for our coach who's been one of the best in the business for the past 25 years. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back on Tuesday with more transfer portal conversation. We'll also keep you up to date on anything else going on in the sport. We got the WNBA draft on Monday night. Yvonne Ejim, see if her name gets chosen. If so, we'll talk about that on Tuesday's show as well. Very excited to see how that goes for her. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.